So welcome everyone to the second episode of our Echoes from the Field series. Today, I'm delighted to welcome two very distinguished guests from Fairfield Geotechnologies. We've got Andrew Lewis, the Vice President of Geoscience, and Bruce Carr, the Principal Technical Advisor. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being here with us. Maybe you could each give us an intro to yourself and also Fairfield and what you do.
Okay. So I'm the principal technical advisor for the whole company, and anything that falls under the technical umbrella of geophysics or sometimes other things as well comes across my desk. My background is I'm a geophysical engineer by background, Colorado School of Mines graduate, and I've been doing seismic for almost 40 years now. Started in the field on acquisition, did about 30 plus years of processing, and then the last 10 or so years really mixing it up with interpretation and stuff. But I'm really back to designing and building program to meet clients' objectives. So that's kind of what I do. And I like to say, I get up every day, excited to go to work.
Very cool. And over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Andrew Lewis, VP Geoscience at Fairfield. Bruce and we're very much looking forward to this conversation because it's an opportunity to showcase what we really talk about every day. And we very much love what we do. I thought I'd go ahead and start us out with a little bit of like an introduction on Fairfield, maybe like a little bit of background on the Permian, and then go dive into some Q&A.
Sounds perfect.
Great. So Fairfield, we're a family-owned company. We were founded in 1974. These days, we're a multi-client seismic data library. We're focused mainly on tight oil basins in the U.S., and we've also got a pretty large contiguous offshore 3D seismic data catalog along the shelf of the Gulf of America. We got into the Permian Basin around 2011, and we've been dabbling there, shooting spec programs ever since. So the EIA estimates about 6.5 million barrels of oil per day of production in the Permian. And about 60% of that oil production is coming out of the Delaware subbasin. Along with the oil, there's a lot of water. We're producing over 22 million barrels of water every day. And that's a mixture of, frac fluids and natural water occurring in these formations. About 13.5 million barrels per day of those are coming from the Delaware Basin. A lot of this water is recycled, but a lot of it's also injected back into the subsurface. And I say all this just to kind of bring to light the incredible amount of logistics and infrastructure that's involved in the development of these tight oil resources. And the seismic data plays a critical role in planning the development of these different assets, whether it's a new oil well or disposing of water from an existing one. The seismic data plays a crucial role. Now, a big challenge for seismic data occurs in the Delaware Basin, and it's caused by, in part, the Cenozoic sedimentary fill. So the good news about the fill, as we call it, is that it doesn't exist everywhere. But there's 3 separate, very thick accumulations of the fill that occur in different parts of the basin. And these, this sedimentary fill really wreaks havoc on the resolution of the seismic data at the reservoir level. And really it renders it not very useful for, planning your development if you have acreage over the fill. So kind of a short description of the geology of the fill. It's basically caused by salt dissolution, primarily in the Salado Formation, and that results in the collapse of the overlying Rustler Formation, and then that gets infilled with sediments from post-Permian formations like the Dewey Lake and the Gatuna red beds. So that's kind of the backdrop I wanted to provide just before we get into the discussion to sort of set the stage for some of the geologic challenges we're trying to overcome and why it's worth the effort to be doing what we're doing out here.
That's really helpful, and it really brings to life the scale of the whole area and the challenges in that specific region. So thank you very much for that. I guess a good place to start on the question front. You recently completed a dense nodal seismic survey in the Delaware Basin. That's now featured in GeoX Pro, and there's some fantastic data visuals. But maybe if you could start by telling people what were the goals of that specific survey.
Love to, yeah. So what what started to develop, from my perspective, talking to all the operators out there, is inside the fill, they had this highly variable shallow event, the Rustler Formation. And that Rustler Formation often, they would drill down and they'd hit it at 1,000 foot. It's a shallow formation. Hit it at 1,000 feet. They'd move over 600 feet. And suddenly that same formation was 1,500 feet deep, or it might be 500 feet deep. So we had this idea from the drill bit and the operators that there was a highly variable formation, the Rustler Formation out here. And so the whole reason behind shooting um, the tight fill test that we did out here was to see if we could image the Rustler Formation itself. And what we proved is all of the legacy data sets out here just never collected the shallow data. And so nobody knew what the shallow data looked like. And the drillers were telling us, it's pretty tough to figure out what's going on out here, but it's a big change. Well, when they started telling me that, they have huge differences with short lateral movements, that immediately, as a seismic processor guy, historically, told me that we had massive statics. I mean, not just little statics in the geophysics world, but hundreds of millisecond type statics. And that was probably the root of our problem. So to get the shallow data, you have to tighten things up. And so we started tightening things up, and we started building a coalition of operators that liked what we were doing. They said, okay, yeah, you're going to go from 495 and 82 to 247s and 41s. And so we just kept getting denser and denser. So we had to add equipment. We had original equipment out there that was, dense by all historical standards, but we went to a factor of 4 to tighten up that to go to the 5 hertz geophones at the time. But then we had this one operator who looked at us and said, it's still not tight enough. You need it even tighter. And we're like, well, what would it take to do to get you guys to join us? And they said, well, it's got to be less than 30 feet. And we said, well, man, that's another factor of 4 denser than what we've already done. So my good friend, Mr. Stan Moyer, I go over and say, hey, I got a problem. Can you help me? And Stan goes, what do you need? And so I commend him for stepping up to the plate, and he brought on board another 24,000. We ended up with almost 40-some thousand channels inside of a 4 square mile area. I had another 100,000 channels laid out for the production, but I had 40,000 channels just inside this 4 square mile area, and that brought on board another operator. And what those guys were after, we proved was accurate. You had to go to these tighter spatial samplings, which became kind of the gold standard. The stride really became the gold standard inside the test because it had the tightest sampling. So from that perspective, that's kind of where it all came about. But the whole goal here was to image the Rustler, because what I knew is the rocks above the Rustler were what were causing us significant imaging issues. When we finally got the data back, everything that the drillers were telling us was true. You had massive structural geology changes, hundreds, maybe 1,000 feet in some locations over very, very short distance.
And that's a pretty important note, Bruce, because a lot of what was thought to be a big fill really turns out to be very much localized, collapsed features that we're able to see on these data now.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so that piece got filled in very quickly. It's like, oh my God, there is a massive amount of shallow structural geology going on here. And we just never collected the data. We just never had it to see it. And so the fill test in that sense was a huge success. I promised all the clients that we would see the top of the Rustler. We did better than that. We started seeing the rocks above the Rustler as well. And so the super tight dense test that we did in the fill area here with the stride, that's where we have the best sampling, and you can really see how it illuminates the shallow geology. So that was the goal, was to see the Rustler. We did that and more.
Do you think this type of data set's helping operators understand that with the right density and the right design, you can overcome that kind of challenge?
That's a very good question, Mike. I think that even now we're still trying to figure out, number one, what's possible logistically to happen. And number two is, what does it actually take to overcome all these challenges? And we've made great strides in that direction with the tests that we've done, but I would say we certainly have we only have more work to do to really figure out exactly what needs to be done out here to you know truly illuminate the reservoir beneath the fill.
I would add to that as we tighten the sampling out here, we are illuminating the shallow, and that has been a huge step in the right direction. So as we like to say, we got that piece of the puzzle solved. Oh, but now with all this tighter, better sampled earth, we're now illuminating all the other challenges that exist in geophysics as well. And so now we're going down other channels to even improve that. Yeah, as I like to just say, and people have seen me talk about this, is legacy data set was what I call the donut hole acquisition. We had this nothing in the short offsets. We had this donut hole of mid-range offsets and then very little in the far offsets. And the translation of that is when you start collecting a lot of short offsets and a lot more far offsets, you can now better dial in the accuracy of the data. So we're getting there. But it also illuminates all the other challenges, all the linear noise, all the mode conversion, all of the everything else out there that we talk about in geophysics are now coming up, and now we're tackling those. And so I think the new frontier is we got the first piece kind of anchored. Now we can go after the other pieces. And then I think what Andrew was really alluding to is at some point, what's the proper density and still become economical? And that's kind of where we're heading now. It's like, okay, we don't need as many of this offset, but we need more of that offset, or we need more of this or less of that. And so the design is always evolving to get the maximum amount of geology out of the geophysics and do it with the proper amount of equipment, in this case, both sources and receivers.
Yeah, and I definitely feel like the sampling does play a key role. It's all about what sampling do you need to capture those near surface geologic complexities. And if we're able to take care of those, sample and take care of those geologic complexities during processing, the reservoir beneath is gonna light up. And that's really what we're after. Not just in the fill, we're trying to improve data throughout the basin. And, thanks to the efforts on Stride's part and other partners, we're heading that direction, and it's very exciting for us.
Very exciting. We kind of touched on it, but maybe you could share a bit more on the design you ended up using. And you've touched on some of the aspects of how you got there with operators wanting denser and denser, but could you kind of high level summarize the design?
So I'd love to let Bruce go through all the design, but what I would like to say is a little bit about how we got there. And it took us, Bruce, what do you think? I mean, it must have taken us almost a year, probably about 10 months of having conversations with operator after operator. And, we're blessed to be able to deal with many smart people in the industry and many great ideas. And it was very hectic. I mean, we were changing things up to, a week, 2 weeks before we were putting phones on the ground. So it was very hectic, and kudos to Bruce for playing a large part in getting this thing off the ground. And Bruce, if you want to go through some of the details of this test, please be my guest.
Sure. So the first thing that we discovered in those meetings with the operators is none of the operators agreed on what the problem was. Okay, so you have all these, chest pumping operators out here, great people, but if you think you can get them to all agree on what the problem is, you're sadly mistaken. So when you start from that point there, it's like, okay, what is it we're trying to solve here? What do we think the problem is? And so I hierarched it into different pieces. I've got 30 plus year of processing experience, and I've done some pretty unique stuff around the world with near surface problems like sand dunes and karsting in the Middle East and things like that. So from my perspective, I started focusing in on where we don't collect the data and we need this particular offset range to actually find what the velocity and what the statics are to even have a fighting chance. And I says, if we can get the statics and the velocities right, then, all the other things that people think it was, is it absorption? Is it scattering? Is it, they had lots of great ideas. And the truth is every one of them is probably right. It's a scale of how much that's affecting it. And before you can say, go after scattering, you have to actually understand what the structure looks like. And if you get the structure right, then you can get the scattering right. So there was a hierarchy in there, and we used some of our legacy data sets and bits and pieces of it to try and prove what we were doing. And then one of the operators actually had a data set that was fairly densely collected. It was fairly old. And so that from that particular data set, we looked at that, and their data set in the fill proved exactly what we were trying to do. So we ended up with a simple 495 feet by 495 feet line spacing, which was about half of what the legacy stuff was out here. And then we went down to an 82.5 by 82.5 foot station space. And then we said, well, you know what? We have this 2-to-1 problem with sources to receivers. So we cut the sources down to 41.25 because we'd be waiting on laying out equipment all the time. So we cut that in half. So we got down to a 41.25 station spacing, which is like kind of about halfway or a quarter of the way to what they kind of shoot in the Middle East. And so with that in mind, it's like, okay, I think I can find the rustler with that density. 41.25 sources, 82.5 receivers, 495.95. The field test, though, a lot of guys just didn't believe. They're just like, no, that ain't going to get us there. We got to do something more. So we went to the 247. We cut everything in half. And so we went down on the test site to cut everything in half. And with the line spacings cut in half, and then we cut the station spacings in half once, and then with the stride, we cut them in half again. So we're down to 20 foot in the station spacings with the stride. And by the way, I'd take 10 if I could get it. We've never reached the quote limit, if you ask me, on what the tightest is you can get. I would probably argue the tightest we can get is the size of a base plate. If that's 10 feet by 10 feet, move up 10 feet and do it again. So I think there's value in all of that. But from our perspective, so now it comes down more of a value. What can we afford?
Just to summarize what that test was, we had a production survey that was being shot with 495 foot source and receiver line spacings, 82.5 foot receiver station spacings, and 41.25 foot source station spacings. This was being shot with our production nodes. So this was 3 geophone string, 3 geophone array of 10 hertz geophones. Then we got some 5 hertz nodes that we ended up deploying at 147.5 foot receiver line spacings with 41.25 foot station spacings. And then the stride nodes cut that station spacing in half again to, a 20-foot station essentially at the same 247.5 foot receiver line spacing. So stride was our densest data set and became our flagship data set out of the test.
Absolutely.
And some of this I actually presented at an EAGE workshop on land seismic acquisition in Calgary back in May. Bruce helped me put that together, and it was a great little study.
And it's an important study, too, the one that he put together, because out of this came this equipment analysis with stride and the 5 hertz geophone and the 10 hertz geophone. And so that was kind of a little bonus thing out of there. One of my pet peeves in the world as far as processing is understanding the difference between acceleration and velocity or geophones. And I think they get abused, and I don't think most processing shops accurately handle that. And there's a couple of different philosophies on how to handle those two as well. Not to bore everybody too much, but at the end of the day, there's a dB per octave difference between acceleration versus velocity. So if you want to take a velocity geophone and you want to turn it into acceleration, you have to differentiate, do a mathematical operation on that, and you can do that. If you do that, then you drive down the low frequencies and you build up the high frequencies. Well, we're in resource plays. Lows are the king out here. We need to preserve every bit of low that we can. So it makes more sense to take the accelerometers, integrate the data, and create a velocity measurement there. And so that's what Andrew's presentation did, is by the time you integrate the accelerometer and make it into a velocity, you do the geophone correction, whether it's a 5 hertz phone or a 10 hertz phone, you can make all of them the same. And the paper that we have shows a really pretty FK plot. And you can really see how, that's some really nasty looking Delaware Basin data, but you know what? They all look about the same. It's very obvious that the super sampled one, the stride, is the best. And most importantly, it doesn't have the aliasing that the other ones do have. So that one operator that really put the screws to us in a good way to get Sam to help us out and get those out there in the field really proved an important point in that sense.
And by the way, Bruce, I do think the FK plots and seismic shots you're talking about are in the GeoExpro article for those who are interested.
They are. They're good stuff. So it's a continuous education of what problem we're trying to solve, both geophysically and geologically. And we're doing a good job on trying to battle that, because there's only so much you can do at some point. It becomes uneconomical to put too many out there, so to speak. So we got to find that balance in there, but make no beans about it. We were down to a 10-foot by 20-foot sampling of the subsurface, and that's 1,000-fold at that little tiny space. As I joked during the processing of that was, if you guys will pay for it, I'll take 10-foot by 10-foot CDP sampling all day long. It's like it just gets better. The running comment with two different processing shops now on our HTD, our high trace density surveys is, hey, if you really sample the data really well, all of our algorithms work. Statics works, velocities works, noise attenuation's much better. So it's like all those years we spent, developing these high-end algorithms, the better sample the data is, the better those algorithms work. And it's kind of like, well, duh.
I'm pretty sure their disk managers aren't very happy with how much space these data sets are taking, but the processors are pretty happy with how the toolkit's working. Yeah.
Yeah. And any other differences in the processing phase from the density? Is it just that everything works better and more smoothly?
I think everything works. I mean, we ended up running an FWI. Of course, we run FWI on all of our data sets at Fairfield now, all the new ones that we do.
But, even prior, Bruce, even prior to the FWI, we've been able to do some really clever velocity model building due to the density of the data.
That's top secret stuff.
And it is good stuff. It's great stuff. Yeah.
But it's true. The sampling tells us everything we need to know about the super shallow. And it also tells me what I don't know yet. So I'm trying to figure out, how do I get the next level of what I don't know, and does it matter? And so that's kind of where the future's at right now, is we're already saying, okay, we got this much information and these are the pieces I'm missing. How do I get those other pieces? So I'm already working on additional acquisition stuff to get those additional pieces. And we just shot a couple more tests here recently around that, focusing on that. And the question is, okay, even if I solve that, does it matter? At some point, I'm guessing we're going to get to a point where it's better, but does it really matter at the zone of interest? And if we, I'm trying to find that limit. Oh no, I don't need it this dense anymore. It's pretty, but I can live with a lot less and still make this economical for the operators. So, but I'm still looking for that limit, and I haven't found it. So
we'll have to help you with that in future. So you mentioned the FWI. That went well.
It went so well that our processing center that we were using, on their own accord, ran the FWI up. So we had FWI in the plan to run it up to a traditional 17-20 hertz range to improve the model for the entire production survey. On the super sampled stride nodes, they went ahead and ran it up to 40 hertz. And so our pleasure, they pulled out some details in the shallow even more. And those details fell through to the imaging below.
And that was published at Image by Veridian this past August. Really nice presentation there. Absolutely.
So they took it upon themselves. They went and did it, and then they told us about it. And of course, they know us pretty well. So we were like little kids in a candy store. This is way too cool. And so from that perspective, they did it on their own, but it did say, okay, well, we need even more processing. If I've got it sampled well enough, I need to spend even more money and more time in the processing side. So that's another piece of the puzzle from a value perspective is what all can we do?
You bring up a good point, though, in that, we hear FWI all the time, FWI, and not enough emphasis is put on the data that's going into FWI. And, I think that's a very, albeit high-level remark, I would say very important point to make, that if you don't collect the appropriate data to meet the assumptions of, these days an acoustic FWI algorithm that we're applying on land, it's it's not really worth the time and effort to go run it on something else, on some old data that doesn't sample what you need it to sample for FWI to work. So the density of the data plays another role in allowing us to take advantage of these more advanced algorithms. And we run FWI on all of our new production surveys these days. And it's really pretty fascinating to be able to see how much detail it provides.
Yeah, we got some examples in the Midland Basin as you're coming up on the Central Basin platform that are stunning on how that fixed things and handles the lateral velocity zone for depth imaging much, much better. But on the Delaware Basin side, one of the things that we know out here is we have not just this high velocity, low velocity collapse zone. Okay, the fill itself is super low velocity, and it sits on top of a high velocity limestone, and then there's a bunch of halites and the anhydrites in between there. And then they sit on top of a really thick, stacked up anhydrite section. And the value of that is when we have salt in there, salt's slow compared to anhydrites. What I've titled this over the years in the Delaware Basin for depth imaging is we basically have our subsalt play onshore. Okay, but it's a sub anhydrite play onshore. So we have these 20,000 feet per second velocities that go into 13,000 feet per second velocities just below there. And then those, which are fast velocities, it's old rock. It's really old rock. The zone of interest is back up to 15, 16,000 feet. Oh, but by the way, we start at 2,000 feet at the surface. So you have 2,000 feet up against 14,000 feet. So you have these really radical velocity shifts in the shallow. And I think that's where the FWI and the higher running of the FWI is pretty important. I think if we can continue to build better and better velocity fields up shallow to capture that, then I think we build the ray path to actually depth image it. And the killer that people don't realize is the slower the velocity is, what that does to a ray path is that ray path basically goes straight up and straight down. So you have to have sampling out there to capture that. If you have sparse sampling and it just goes straight up, straight down, you don't even capture that. You don't see it. So you literally have to keep bringing everything in tighter and tighter, and the station spacing plays into that, the line spacing plays into that. But like I say, there's a point at which it becomes probably uneconomical, but maybe not. I don't know. I mean, that's your problem, Mike, to get this economical for us.
Sure, we can solve that. and I guess we touched on a bit, but the density is obviously helps line processing, and the final image. What impact did it have on the final image?
Yeah, a lot. In the fill zone itself, we're basically very close to the same spectrum. We're still a slightly less, but we've dramatically improved the spectrum to be similar to what it is out of the fill versus in the fill. Andrew, I don't know if you want to talk about.
Well, I was just going to bring up, most of what we've been able to see at the reservoir level was from the production survey because we had those far offsets that were part of the production survey. One thing that kind of limited us in this initial fill test is we had a very densely populated 4 square miles of receivers. Bruce, I think you'd mentioned maybe earlier, we had over 40,000 receivers in that 4 square mile area, but we did not have, the far offsets to help as much in that. So that's part of why I say, there's a bit more work to be done. But when you look at what we were able to see in terms of the shallow geologic complexity that we were after, I think we found out a whole lot of really interesting things about the subsurface. And, we continue to think about it and act on it every day.
Absolutely. We had a glimpse of it too, because the nice thing that you guys allowed us to do is to keep the stride on the ground to shoot the production through there. So we shot the fill test first. So you guys, we went out, laid out the fill test, the 2D, the 3D test. We laid it all out. We shot it through there. And then we decided that we're going to leave all that equipment on the ground and we're going to take the production, the 3-vibe production back through there. So it was on the ground for a month, maybe more than that. I don't know. It might have been 40 days or so, just sitting there waiting for the production to come back through. And thank you, Mike, for you guys stepping up to the plate, letting us have that. But anyway, we ran back across there with the production data. So I did have 3 vibes shooting into that 4 square miles. So we got a glimpse of the far offsets, and it became very apparent that the far offsets are needed to do the deeper imaging in the zone of interest. So it kind of said, okay, well, this is what we got out of the fill test, is down from the surface down to this high velocity Castile formation. But below that, you really have to get out to, 15, 20,000 foot offsets. And we had 60,000 feet of offset to evaluate on this. So we had really far offsets to look at. Unfortunately, at 60,000 feet, the first breaks are below, so you don't actually get anything.
Yeah.
But somewhere around 40,000 feet of offset, your first breaks are coming in at six seconds or so. But that's all information to tell us, well, if we needed to know something at 60,000 feet of offset, which I don't think we do, but if you go back to what Andrew was talking at the very beginning, it's not just about the oil, it's about the water disposal, it's also about seismicity. So all of those things get wrapped into what can seismic data do? Well, if you have deep-seated fault systems out here, which we do, those far offsets we regularly use out to 30,000 feet of offset. And that's to help improve the basement imaging. And there's a lot of structure down in the basement. And that stuff comes right up to there. So we're trying to give as much information as possible to all the operators so that they can, better behave and better take care of our reservoir out here. They don't want to kill off the oil reservoir. They want to protect it. And so that's how we look at seismic, is that it's the only tool that shows you the entire view. Everything else is a sample of one spot out there. Seismic is the only tool that's trying to connect all the dots.
And we kind of touched on as we go on, but are you able to quantify how much the imaging and the understanding of the Rustler formation has uplifted through this? Or is that a hard question?
No, it's an easy one. I got to take this one, Bruce, because it's an easy one. We never saw the Rustler before, so it was a 100% uplift. and it was very fascinating because Bruce had mentioned we had heard some client feedback about really we can't. From well to well, we don't know what depth we're going to hit the Rustler at. And it's because of these localized collapse features. And we overshot some of our legacy spec surveys. And, it's a great comparison because the legacy surveys did not have the density to capture any of this nearer surface geology. And then poof, you get to actually see a good bit of detail around where the Rustler collapsed and the Salado had dissolved and where the infill is coming in, etc. So that was very exciting for us.
It was huge, Mike. Everybody was like, oh my gosh, because there's other problems too. They talk about water. Well, there's a lot of shallow water disposal as well. So there's people interested in, depositing water in the Delaware Mountain section, which is right below. Well, you don't want to feed that in and lubricate, shallow faults, or you don't want to pipe into some sort of a fault system that goes all the way to the surface and create a water well. I wonder if I've seen that before. So from those perspectives, it's like our goal to see as much as we can as shallow as possible is super important.
Mike,
no idea.
Years ago, Bruce and I did a webinar about kind of the value of seismic data from just beneath the surface all the way into the basement. And it still holds true today, maybe even more so. I mean, from the very shallow, we're talking about geohazards. In going into the Delaware Mountain Group, we're talking about water injection, understanding faulting, things of that nature. Then we have all of the stacked reservoir from the Bone Spring to the Wolf Camp, and then even deeper, there are other formations that are being used for water disposal, and we're mapping intra-basement faulting to try and mitigate seismicity. So if there's ever a place where seismic data has value, it's the Delaware Basin, because the prize is pretty big, and you can use that data from just beneath the surface all the way into the basement.
So we started off by saying some of the operators are a bit skeptical about the value of seismic. Do you think this project has altered that perception in the industry?
We're on our third survey in less than a year.
Well, that's nice. Okay, that's a very
clear,
ample answer. Yeah,
that's a great point.
Yep.
Bruce, I mean, I guess where are we? We're over 800 square miles in now since we've done this initial fill
test.
Add it up.
Probably closer to 1,000 square miles we'll shoot by mid next year. And so I would say the operators are voting with their checkbooks. So that's always a good sign.
It's nice for everyone. Yeah.
But That's absolutely correct. And I think, there's certainly value there, and we'll certainly try to continue to improve what we're pushing out here. I agree with Bruce when he mentions we've not reached the limits of what we can do with the seismic data out here.
So building on that, I guess we've said if it was economical, you'd go denser. Are there any other kind of learnings you'd take forward from the project into future surveys? And some of those you'll have brought forward already, but any other learnings you'd take into the future?
Well, from my perspective, you're going to hear us talk a little bit about, we coined the term HTD, high trace density, and then we're working on a new term which comes straight out of the field test and the stuff we did with the Stride and the other nodes out there. Is we have this separate test inside the production survey to do this, which is we do that because we've already paid for all the permits and all that kind of stuff. So it's the most economical way to do a test. So we continue to do that. I just finished 3 tests on the current project, but the production survey on the project that we're just finishing up, we took from the field test that the tighter line spacings down to 247 are important. So we put those into the production, and we have a couple hundred square miles inside 300 plus square mile survey that we have tighter spatial sampling. So I didn't do it for the whole survey. I only did it for certain sections to cover specific geology. So a term we're working on coining now is SIS, HTD SIS, a high trace density with survey inside of a survey. And so I can see myself building production surveys that actually take advantage of whatever the challenge is. And so that's going to require different thinking on acquisition. It's going to require different thinking on design work. And it's all about what problem are we trying to solve.
Well, and I was going to mention, Bruce, we were talking earlier about how the crews that are acquiring these data for us are maxed out. I mean, I liked what you said on one of our side conversations. They're running a little city out there. They're basically, we're using every bit of equipment, that we can to try and get these data, and the crews are large, and it's really fun for us to see some of this work come to life and be out there doing this.
Yeah, just not geophones, but we got 40 vibes out there. We got 10, 12 generators. These aren't little generators. These generators will run a small city, each one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, these are massive units that they've got out there. They've got trailer after trailer after trailer of equipment and stuff. So from that perspective, it's huge in the amount of equipment. And oh, by the way, it's going to take a lot of people to deploy all that stuff. So we're pushing the limits on equipment. We're pushing the limits on people. And so there's a lot rolled up in all of that. But the goal is to, if I wanted to double everything again, they don't have the equipment, they don't have the people, and probably people is actually the bigger problem. And so how can we slice and dice this to make it make sense? I would say in the Middle East, those guys, they can just go out and carpet shoot for the most part, these super, super dense surveys with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of channels. And I would ask them, and I have asked them, well, how many of those channels are overkill? Do you need 7,000 fold at 2,000 meters of offset? Probably not. You could probably do with a quarter of that and be just as happy. There's a point of no return is what I'm getting at. And so we're trying to rethink, how do you design a survey to capture all of the things you want to capture, and at the same token, not overcomplicate the amount of equipment that you need and the personnel you need to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting kind of design challenge, and yeah, lots of angles play into it. I guess one last question, if I can. You've spoken a bit about what you're doing now. What's next for Fairfield Geotechnologies that you can share? Obviously, there'll be some things you can't, but what's coming up?
Well, we're shooting the New Mexico side of the Delaware Basin pretty solid right now. Like I say, we started laying out on our 3rd survey since this test just 2 days ago. And we haven't finished the last one, so we've got another 10 days of shooting on the last survey. And both of this survey we're on right now has the survey inside of a surveyor, so the SIS exists in that. The next survey coming up has an SIS section as well. I talked about doing some other testing out there. I can't really talk much about that testing right now, but we're looking at even denser stuff, some carpet sampling type stuff. We're looking at some different sourcing out there to look at what we could solve with different sourcing to integrate. We're looking at traditional sources, but using them very differently. We've always got some wild cards that we're playing with here. Some of them I'm sure will fail, but
That's what
it's
I was
doodle
going to say
bugging at
is
its best.
I was going to say, if you really want to get some things done in West Texas or, southern New Mexico, you got to have a little bit of doodle bugger in you, and you got to try different things. And so another shout out to Bruce for, his creativity in what's next. I couldn't tell you definitively what will be the next big thing for us, but what I can tell you definitively is we're trying out a lot of different acquisition techniques, a lot of different processing technology, and we're really trying to figure out, by working with companies like you and with our customer base, to keep turning over every stone that we can to continuously improve what we're putting on the ground out there.
It's really cool to hear. Anything else you'd like to cover before we close out? Anything we didn't touch on which you wanted to cover?
One thing I had kind of thought about that I hadn't really mentioned at all during this interview was my thoughts about Stride. And one thing that I think is really cool about your company, Mike, is that the Stride node, in my opinion, is Moore's Law in action. It's a smaller, less expensive node. It is Moore's Law in action. And so kudos to you for being able to put that together. And there's certainly value in that technology. And I'm sure that in the coming years, we're just going to see it get better.
It's really nice to hear. Thank you very much. Anything else you want us to cover, Bruce?
I got to give a shout out to the underwriters, our operators and stuff out here. I probably can't list them by name, but they know who they are. And there's some key people in each of these companies that are just, awesome doodle buggers. They're these, I don't, as I like to say, I don't really know all the answers. Sometimes people think I do, but I really don't. And I can't figure it out without their help. And so there are some really cool people in the industry and all of the regular companies that you can think about. And I didn't do this alone. I sat in rooms and we kicked around ideas and we looked at data and we said, what is the data trying to tell us? And that's kind of the thing is it's speaking to us. Are we going to listen? And if we are, then what action are we going to take with whatever the data is trying to tell us? And is it feasible, economical? And that's where these operator guys are just like, well, we did this test over here and we saw this. And so will say, we've already tested that and we got to get, we have to have sampling tighter than what you're doing. It's not going to do. They're right. So it's a collaboration, I guess is where I'm going, is no company has all the answers. None of these guys have all the answers either. But as we put it together, the consortium of people we did for the field test, our project manager, Steve, was paranoid. Because, oh my God, we have all these important people in the same room, and they're all very confident of what they're doing. And poor Steve was like absolutely terrified of this project. 6 months later, it was one of the smoothest projects we ever did. Everybody was so collaborative and got along so well and fed off each other. And they started having meetings without us to discuss what else can we do. They wanted to take the vendor piece out of it and do their own stuff. And then they come back and tell us, fill us in on like, okay, we want to try and do, so collaboration still exists. We can't all just get along.
It's really important, and it's where some of the best ideas come from. So,
yeah, I was just gonna say it's a little bit funny because all of the acreage for the most part out here has been locked up, and so before when people were trying to go get different acreage, maybe they're not as willing to share as much, but we definitely provide a lever to cost share amongst different operators, which very much enables the economics of some of what we're trying to do. And since those acreage positions are pretty much locked up right now, it behooves them to get together and bring these bright minds together and collaborate to be able to get to what is the answer out here. And so it's been a pleasure working with all of them.
It's really cool. Well, I'll close by saying a massive thank you. It's been really good fun and insightful talking to you both. So thank you to you both, and thanks to the wider Fairfield Geotechnologies team. A big thank you for joining us today and giving us such a good overview, a kind of rich insight into the test and what it's uncovered and what the future might look like. And just for everyone listening, obviously, if you want to go a bit deeper, the GeoExpro paper covering a lot of the images and the details of what happened is now available to download on Stride's website, certainly, and probably on the Fairfield website as well. So, yeah, thank you very much, guys.
Thanks for having us, Mike.